got
So
my
yeah,
friend and
yeah.
yours, Lord Pasta Productions, and
Hey,
we're gonna continue our communism
and we
discussion.
got over there on that side,
Yeah.
Snake with the right. You all know him. You all love him. And we're gonna talk about hypocrisy, probably the always fickle concept of hypocrisy, right?
Yes. So to catch up, anyone listening, we had that we had an original discussion about communism, and then I saw your quick little like 3 minute video about hypocrisy from socialist streamers,
Yeah,
and
specifically Hasan and
yeah,
also
and
Vaush as
Vaush.
well.
And I just decided to do a kind of an impromptu response to it, and yeah, and why don't you fill us in about your response to that?
Yeah, well, I don't think that it actually your response proved that they were hypocrites in the sense that we understand hypocrisy. I removed that video because you were right about one very important thing, and that was you were right about exploitation from online files and the sharing of online files on YouTube and etc. through AdSense and that sort of thing. And you were correct about that. That is, I think, a type of artificial scarcity and therefore exploitation, regardless of whether you copyright what you made or not. So, and that just made me like, well, I don't want to say things that are false. I have to remove the video, but I still hold the position that they're not technically hypocrites, although I do think that they're stupid and very lazy. I think very lazy about how they define socialism, just to like they arbitrarily defining themselves out of what they would consider, immoral, kind of, right? But I don't think they're hypocrites because they do make the logical distinction of, oh well, if it's just me and this and that person, then it's not exploitation. So I can say that they're wrong, but I can't say that they're hypocrites,
Mm.
right?
Yeah, I think one of the problems is they're pretty vague about what their socialism actually is and what their standards actually
Yeah,
are. And I know Vosh himself has stated like he has to tread very carefully, especially optically, um, to make sure that he like the way he put it, so that I can justify punching people I don't like, but so that I can justify people not punching me. So,
yeah, that's a stupid thing that I hear on the left all the time, where
mm,
some leftists that I'm like good friends with will come on and I'll be like, hey, I believe in free speech, so, and the reason I believe in free speech is because, if somebody comes up and says something offensive to me, that is always less harm, net harm, than if I punched them in response. That would be a net harm if I did that. And they're like, well, I don't think you could say that. And they always come with some weird excuse, and it's really it's a thing that's common on the left now because of I think Vaush does that a lot. Um, I think it's silly. I think it's wrong, um, and all that stuff. And he's guilty of doing that a lot. But I don't think it makes him a hypocrite. I think it just makes him lazy and it makes him wrong,
mm,
and very arbitrary in his position. If you catch my drift.
um, yeah. Have you seen that Vosh is unironically evil video?
Yeah, I think that was not the best uh, way of going after Vosh, but I do think that Vosh engages in negative behavior, specifically through his positions of anti-realism and his positions of advocating for lying. Right?
Mm,
Basically, he says, "Well, if they're gonna lie, I'm gonna lie too." Essentially, which is it's like a very stupid understanding of utilitarian ethics.
mm-hmm.
Um,
Like winning at all
but
costs, basically.
yeah, but you don't win when you do that, so it doesn't
Yep.
even make any sense. Um, but I think I see a lot of Vosh and a lot of Hasan in a lot of the leftists that I talk to on a day-to-day basis who don't come from like a long history of like questioning their political beliefs and going through rigor and stuff like that, and they just sort of arrive at the position because of the society that we're in right now, basically.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and they'll say things like this, and it's because they're normal people and they don't really think about it too deeply, and it's not even necessarily that they've been told it by Vaush or Hasan or something, although that is a big problem. Uh, it's just that that's how most people are, unfortunately. I'm sure you've dealt with stuff like that from the right wing side as well. People being weirdly inconsistent for silly reasons.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and it's just something you have to deal with when your movement gets very large and starts appealing to, people who aren't, reading large tomes and stuff,
Yeah, I think
so to
it's
speak.
it's just a human problem where a lot of people
Hmm.
don't actually arrive at their positions logically. They just happen to emotionally agree with it, and then they basically find ways to support their bias. And
That's definitely true.
yeah, and ironically, smart people are better at finding ways to justify their bias. So
Yeah.
you'll see highly intelligent people more entrenched in ridiculous positions,
Hmm.
oftentimes than of course you do see a lot of Dunning Kruger
Yeah, but I don't
out
think
there.
Vosh is smart. I don't think Hasan. I think Hasan is actually smarter than Vosh,
Hmm.
which I don't know if it's a controversial take, but I don't think either of them are like Noam Chomsky or something. Like I don't think because Noam
Yeah.
Chomsky agrees with me on free speech and stuff, but um, well,
Well,
that's not the only reason.
it's
But
I mean if you consider like deviousness and weaseliness to be a form of intelligence, I would say Vosh is pretty good at that.
I don't
Um,
think he weasels. I think he just makes up stuff to like be consistent and also not have to beholden himself to any principles.
mhm.
I don't think he's necessarily like an evil actor or anything. I just think he's existing and doing what any person would do who, I mean, knows a little bit about leftism and stuff. That's
Yeah,
what I think. I don't think now Hassan might be a little bit more weaselly. But I don't
hmm,
necessarily know about that either because sometimes Hassan will say something. I'll be like, oh, he's almost right about that.
yeah.
Um, and,
It's hard to
obviously
tell
my
exactly.
position, yeah, obviously my position is I'm closer to Vaush and Hassan ideologically. Back in the day in 2018, in 2019, I was a market socialist back then, and then I saw these people. All of a sudden, market socialism was cool, and I was like, "Okay, who made this cool?" And lo and behold, it's Vosh and it's Hassan. It's all these people, and I guess you just get what you get. You don't get to ask for what you get as a someone ideologically. So I
Hmm.
guess I have to just deal with this. I mean, I think their impact is obviously overall positive because they're advocating for market socialist solutions to problems. Although I do see huge problems with the way in which they do it.
Yeah.
Right, that would be my position. I don't know if we obviously we disagree on that because we disagree with obviously you're not a market socialist. I am. So
Hmm.
you would see them as like evil and conniving and my goodness. But yeah, you'd see them as evil and conniving, whereas I would merely see them as foolish and stuff like that.
Well, I see their kind of tactic to their rhetoric is kind of conniving, but their position, I think, is will bring evil things. But I don't. They're obviously motivated by trying to create a better world. I think that they believe that they're trying to create a better world. Um, but I do think, especially Vosh has kind of an underhanded, dishonest style, and he knows it,
Mm.
and he justifies it too.
Yeah, I think that's silly. And but the weird thing about Vaush is on his live streams is a totally different person than when he is in person with someone. It's very weird. Like
Mm-hmm.
if you ever see him like on a podcast where he's in person and he's in the recording studio, he's 100% different. Like he sounds like me. It's weird. Like it's almost
Yeah.
like why aren't you like that all the time? And I think the reason is because he has this type of performative nature that he engages in on his podcasts, on his live streams
Yeah.
that he
It's
does,
about
and
optics.
and it is about optics for him. And it's not that optics is important. Like I don't
Mm-hmm.
want to say don't have optics. I consider optics, but you can't like betray being correct for optics.
Yeah.
Like it's that undermines you ultimately. So
It's the
you
dark
really shouldn't
side.
be doing that. I think he does it because he's lazy and it's
Yeah.
the easy thing to do, and because he kind of just riffs, and that's how he turns on the live stream. He just talks, and eventually he gets himself down a line of saying something to rile up his audience, and he has to continue. If he just says, "Well, nope," then that just ruins the momentum, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it worked for him. Look at how many subs he has. I followed him in 2019 when he didn't have any of those subs.
Mm-hmm.
Back then, he was just some angry market socialist who would yell at people, and I watched him because I thought it was funny.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I started noticing him maybe a couple years ago, maybe even less, but quickly became one of the biggest. Someone who could trigger me pretty easily.
Hmm.
um, but yeah, so I think if you push them, they would have to kind of accept your framework of like what exploitation is. I think that that's pretty common. Of
Yeah, they
like,
would have to accept it.
yeah, like
Because
that's what
and
socialism
Vosh's
is.
little excuse, like, oh, I can't create a cooperative YouTube channel. Yes, you have. Yes, you can. I have. I've done that.
Hmm.
And like someone like non-compete is literally a member of like multiple online cooperatives. It's I mean it's very easy to do. You just have to not be have a bourgeois mindset. Like it's of course he talks about that all the time, but he has a bourgeois mindset, so he can't do it.
Yeah.
uh,
So I mean, one problem I found was that they can like I find the excuse that, oh well, we live in capitalism, so I can't really live out my socialist ideals. I find that to be a really weak excuse to,
it's a cop out, and it's
yeah,
very effective because it's somewhat true. It's like half true. It's
yeah,
like, okay, we live in this order, production is a need, you have to go out and you have to buy food, whatever. Okay. And you're buying it from people who've been exploited. Um, that's Nobody's out there saying that you have to not do that.
mm-hmm,
That fact doesn't excuse you to then go become a business owner or become some like huge hedge fund manager or something. Like
yeah,
and Vaush will take it to that level. He will literally make that argument. It's like that doesn't follow, and that's not. I mean, and then he'll say things like, "You just have to be doing the good thing, right? Doing the something better, right?" He'll say, "Well, the better thing is to start a co-op. The better thing is to not engage in exploitative practices, and it's not impossible to engage in exploitative practices. So when I see you not doing that, I just have to ask. I have to ask the question, why didn't you do that? I mean, there should be some reason, or else, you are acting hypocritically, right?
mm-hmm,
That's what you're doing."
yeah. And like one of my points was you can't. I understand that you can't get a one-to-one socialist economy. No one's expecting, like, you're not a hypocrite if you earn money and buy stuff. If you're a socialist,
Mhm.
but if you have the opportunity to engage in some sort of proxy or some way of getting closer to the socialist ideals and you don't do that, then that would be hypocritical. Like like
Yeah,
the
I
thing about
agree.
the taxes, like socialists I mean, some socialists believe in taxation, but like not the anarcho kind. The whole thing is
Mm.
not about taxing and redistributing the taxes. It's about overhauling the whole system of production. But
Mm.
that would be kind of like a proxy for the overhauling of production is redistribution, and that's as close as you can get in this economy. So I think, and if you aren't currently being taxed enough, then you should be giving up that whatever amount of money you think is fair to be giving up, and that would be more
I
in line.
I have to push back on this because socialists advocate for taxation in a very specific way. If they advocate for taxes, like for example, when I say in capitalism we should have this and that tax, these taxes are taxes of the bourgeois class, and they're taxes because you're exploiting people. And if someone isn't engaged in exploitation, uh, by their own standards, because that's how we're understanding hypocrisy, then they necessarily wouldn't morally hold the position that they would be taxed, and therefore they would not need to, to avoid hypocrisy by giving money away to a certain rate. Right, that's what I would say. And since someone like Hasan or Vaush don't think that what they do is exploitation, and they therefore don't think that they are bourgeois, they are not hypocrites for not giving money away, um, because that is not against their personal ideology. Now, do I think that's a vapid ideology that is specifically made to, get them out of having to have obligations? Yes. But does that make them hypocrites? No, because they've done that, right? They've gone through that uh, exception making process so that they are not hypocrites anymore.
So it's not about the amount of money that they have; it's more how they got the money.
For most socialists, who are actually like how I would say socialists would be people who are critical of the mode of production of socialism. They would say that the reason why we support progressive taxation is because it is a way to tax the bourgeois. It is a way of getting money back from those who did not earn that money. They took that money. And so it should be the people's money, is what they would say. At least as a facsimile for the people who actually produced it, the state will essentially, handle that democratically in the meantime. Whether they're statist or anti-statist, that's irrelevant. So you kind of get my point, right?
Mm-hmm.
They're not necessarily hypocrites. Now, some of them are like sock dems. I think sock dems might be hypocrites for this, because sock dems don't understand classes. They don't think that there's a distinct bourgeois class. They don't think that there's a distinct working class. And so their taxes are entirely based on the liberal notion of tax brackets, of income. And so if they advocate for higher taxes then and they don't give away money, although there are lots of different arguments about this, I do think that by your standard of hypocrisy that you're laying out for me, they would be hypocrites. But I do think they could then appeal to, oh well, charity is not the same as taxes and all this stuff. And then we could have a conversation about that. But then again, there's no sock dem here to have that conversation with.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah, I think there's a point there, but I think the larger point is the socialist values would be, and I know not all of them probably agree with this, would be that the economy is there to provide production for people and all people, and I think that some form of charity or some form of redistribution in this system is the closest that they're going to get to the fairer uh, model of production and distribution that they would get to.
yeah, and I do think that it's an imperative on everyone to, when they can, engage in philanthropy
Mm-hmm.
and charity. Right, I agree with that, and I do think that we should judge these people for, not fulfilling their moral obligation, of being a decent person. I think everyone agrees with this, though. Everyone thinks that we should engage in philanthropy. We should help those who are needy. I think everyone agrees with that. Even like ANCAPs say that all the time.
Hmm.
Um, but I don't think it's inherent in their philosophy as a moral obligation because they're merely understanding it as a means to an end, right? And I do think that people like specifically Vaush has engaged in some charity uh, in the past. He has gone out and done certain things.
Hmm.
Although Hasan, that one, it does stick with Hasan. And I do think that we should be judgmental of Hasan about that, right? But
Hmm.
Vaush less so because he's sort of engaged in that um, type of thing.
Yeah, and I think as far as like the ANCAP moral obligation to do charity, I think most of them, at least I definitely, I lean ANCAP, but I'm not full ANCAP. um,
Hmm. I
I
lean mutualist, but I'm
yeah
not fully yet.
yeah I I would feel a moral obligation to donate to charity, but in a sense of like, but I want it to be voluntary. I want to be able to choose when and where, but I would feel obligated to help people I see
But
or
it's a
people who are
good,
in my community.
right? It's
Yeah.
a good to do that,
Mhm.
right? It's there's some fancy word for it. Supererogative versus some other thing.
Yeah.
Vosh always likes to say this because he can hand wave all the stuff that he doesn't do
Mhm.
off of that. But yeah, for ANCAPs, that will be a real thing, but that doesn't stop it from being a real moral imperative, right? Uh, you should want to help people. You should want to make people happy, all that stuff.
Mhm.
And you, with your moral system, if it's probably changed vastly since we last talked about that. I know my moral system has changed vastly since we last talked about that, but it would entail the maximization of human subjective will, and I think that as a part of that, it would behoove people to give to others. It would behoove people to do that voluntarily, right?
Mhm. Yeah, mine is close. It's more like maximization of coexistence or freedom, which includes human will, includes basically
Yeah, and
opportunity, so things like that.
yeah, no, I agree. I think that that's all aspects of the same thing. I think that our moral systems have converged on our our like outcomes again, even though we disagree on the reasons why it is
Mhm.
how it is.
Yeah.
Once again, but we kind of have like the same moral outlook as so I define like maximization of preferential wills for every subject, like something like that. Some long phrase I would say is my moral maxim that I would say governs society. But that's morality. If you don't want to get into morality,
Yeah, I think that's kind of like the balance point between freedom. Like
yeah,
freedom for one person would be different than the freedom you need to strike between two people, because then all of a sudden, well,
exactly.
like I'm free to do stuff as long as it doesn't affect you. And
Yeah, that's
it's
a
a
hundred
tricky
percent
thing
true.
to kind of articulate, but I think we get it instinctively. Um,
Have I ever sent you? Have I ever sent you my book that I wrote?
no.
It has a whole passage directly on this topic, on the paradox of freedom and how we think of freedom as permission, but ultimate permission is ultimate enslavement, and ultimate enslavement is a negation of permission. So freedom negates itself.
Hmm.
Freedom's a contradiction, right? And so we understand freedom dialectically. So as like a Hegelian, I would understand freedom dialectically to be an ever working out process of the idea of autonomy. And eventually there'll be a balance, as you say, a balance where a person's wills are actualized, and that will be liberty. That's true liberty.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's interesting. You should send that to me.
Yeah, I might. I'll do that after this conversation.
Yeah.
But to bring it back to the hypocrisy thing, you do still think that they're hypocrites,
Yeah.
right?
And I was gonna say, do you think would you agree that it's hypocritical to kind of be a voice in this movement, but not spend any effort to actually um, advance the movement, like spending your resources on specifically building up co-ops or buying out landlords in order to have like a socialist mode of housing people. Do you think that they have a moral
Yeah,
responsibility to do that?
they do.
Okay.
Yeah, they do. And I think that uh, Vaush has has done this through his charity work. That he's trying to do that more and more often. The charity things that he does. I don't think he's doing it as much as he can, but I do think it suffices. It's kind of like okay, it's fine. And Hasan tries to get his whenever he has a product that he wants to have like for merchandise and stuff, he tries to find cooperatives to produce his products. Now there's some type of exploitation in that, uh, which makes him kind of weirdly hypocritical, but then he finds a way out of it by making all these exceptions. But I do think that that kind of almost suffices. Now with Hassan, I do think that there might be a little bit of hypocrisy. Or with someone like Philosophy Tube, there's a little bit of hypocrisy. Also, Philosophy Tube is also like uh, somehow like less aware of philosophy than Hassan and Vaush. It's very absurd. But
Yeah,
yeah, I do
I
think
would agree
that
with that.
Philosophy Tube and maybe Hassan have some form of like vague hypocrisy, but I don't think it's like huge hypocrisy. I think it's like a little bit of hypocrisy.
Mm. Yeah, and I'm not aware of the specifics of what they've done um, charitably.
Well,
I
Philosophy Tube lied.
okay,
They said that they were like they lied about how much money they made.
yeah, and it's hard to say exactly how much is necessary. Like, do you have to spend all of your surplus money? Do you have to just spend a little bit?
Yeah,
What is actually appropriate?
I think as long as you are attempting to move society towards your goals in a meaningful manner, as long as you're not acting against those goals in some manner, I think then you are not a hypocrite. You are acting in accordance with your principles, right? I think that's a reasonable standard to have, right? So like me, am I a hypocrite? Well, I don't exploit people. And I engage in advocacy, and I attempted to start a bunch of co-op YouTube channels in the past. So I don't think I'm a hypocrite. And in terms of we'll go out and start an actual co-op. Well, I don't really have that much money. I mean, I'm self-employed myself, um, which is a kind of I guess emancipated proletariat because I own my own means of production. Um, uh, but if I ever came into a bunch of money, I would then go out and try and give that to people starting cooperatives or try to start cooperatives myself. Right. So I don't think that I qualify as a hypocrite. And someone like maybe non compete or what's his name? Uh, Bad Mouse Productions, who actually goes out and organizes tenants unions. I think those are examples of people who are very much in line with their principles as socialists. It's not hard. It really isn't that hard. It's just don't exploit people, right? That's all it takes.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Yeah,
you know,
I'm just wondering, like, okay, so well, I went to a soup kitchen once and served people once. It's like, does that count, or do you have to be closer to like, oh, I every day I'm at the soup kitchen? You know, it's
I
a
think
spectrum, but
I think the soup kitchen in of itself, I don't think that's an inherently left wing thing to
yeah. Well,
engage.
it was just
I
it's just an
I would
example, but
say more along the lines of giving money if
mm-hmm.
you're like if you're advocating for higher taxes, um, but more importantly, if you're a socialist and you are in the position where a socialist would say that you would need to pay taxes, you're exploiting people. So why are you doing that? Like, why are you engaging in exploitation in the first place? If you're locked into the position of exploitation, like if by some means, by some, if you uh, gave away the company, your only other option was give away the company to some guy who would exploit people more, then okay, stay in your position, do a transition to like a cooperative or something. Um, that's what you should do. That's what you should be working towards. But if you're just saying, okay, I'll just sit on the exploitation and then maybe I'll pay more taxes, I still think you're a hypocrite. Or like give money away. I still think you're a hypocrite because you're engaging in the exploitation. Um, right. Unless you're a sockdown, then I guess you wouldn't be a hypocrite. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Um, so I think my main point probably would be that I just don't think that the this definition of exploitation as um, not giving some like the original creator the full value of what they produce. I think that that's untenable because it kind of forces everyone to be hypocrites as like in the sense if you do any economic activity for profit that's not like the producer and the consumer, that's the end of the relationship. I think any economic activity outside of that is going to be exploitative by that definition.
Well, this all comes down to what value is, I think. I think that's an important aspect of this. Now, I say I support a labor theory of value, but really what that is a theory of change, a theory of value. So change being energy um, and entropy um, creates and destroys value, and it is thereby the cause of the value of anything for any person. I would say. I think that's pretty sound. Um, and so I would say that in some circumstances, taking a product, a determinate, a finite thing, and holding it for, say, 10 years and then selling it has produced change in that object. And thereby its actual price has changed or is sort of justly understood as being changed. So certain things like that, or moving a product, because moving is labor, would change the value. Right?
Mm-hmm.
Does this make sense?
Yeah,
And so
it's
I think obviously there may be some residual exploitation. I think all markets have some type of exploitation because you're you're withholding artificially something from society through property rights, right? Um, but I also think that there's a necessity to have that in a society. If you don't have that in a society, then I don't think the society can function. So the balance for me is where we can remove this advanced exploitation through some consistent framework, but retain the benefits of personal property. And somewhere there's a balance there. And that's where I say the line is drawn. So, for example, I would say you can't detach someone from the value of the product that they produce. What is the value of the product they produce? It is the value of the product when presented to the market. And you can't wield property. This is a type of private property. You can't wield property in a way that allows you to collect surplus of that, is what I would say. And I think that is a logically understood thing. It is not vacuous or kind of like has gray lines or anything. That's something we can speak of as existing in society. For example, when I hire people through wages and I place their product on the market and that product sells for a certain amount and I receive the surplus in that and then distribute the wage to them, that is a clear and definite thing that has occurred in which I have, given my definition, detached them from the value they have produced in the context of this uh, legal system or moral system that we're engaging in. And so I would say that we can understand that that is something that would be an unjustified use of property in my system, right?
Mm. But wouldn't placing something on the market be change or adding to the value of that product?
Yes, it is a type of change, um, but I do not think that it is a substantial change uh, to produce the profit. I am unconvinced of the substantial change of taking a produced product and presenting it to the public. I don't accept that premise, um, so to speak. Right? I don't. I'm unconvinced of that notion. I do think it may convey some value, but I think that the value that it conveys is most accurately portrayed um, without the backing of state force. Right? I would say that the value that moving it to the market uh, increases in the product should be ascertained in a system not based on the threat of a property uh, relationship backed up by the state, right? I think that that is clearly uh, distorting what the real value that is contributed there is. And I would further say that we can look at that system and we can also look at a system like a market socialist model where that value is ascertained by a group of people and say that that is in fact more justified because they are now ascertaining the utility to them as a group, to production as a function socially, um, and then paying them according to that need for that function as provided by them. Does that make sense? I feel like that's a rational way of looking at it.
Um, yeah, I mean that first part you're saying that it's like a small addition of value. I think that that's definitely true, but I don't think it's exploitative. But that's one thing. That's why the industry has to keep pumping it out more and more because it's at scale.
Yeah,
You're
but you
collecting a
you
small
want it to be
profit at
unbalanced.
scale. What?
You essentially want kind of forgive me for the analogy, some kind of artificial uh, pulling of the scales of the value of this movement of the commodity to the market, um, in the form of a state-backed, a monopoly of use of force-backed property notion. Now, I'm
Well,
conceding to you a lot of things here. I'm saying that all property has this problem. And I'm saying that all exchange has this problem. But I'm also saying that the difference between that type of exchange and the type that occurs in this relationship is that the type that occurs in between trades is a product of a necessary um, construct, a necessary construct being personal property. We need that for a type of liberty. I am convinced. I'm convinced of that premise, that we need some type of personal property for liberty, and entailed by that is markets. Now, with this other relationship, this capitalistic relationship, I'm unconvinced that we need that for liberty. I'm unconvinced that that is something that is entailed by personal property, first and foremost, which I think I can demonstrate logically. Um, and also that this type of exploitation is not then needed for human freedom, right? That's my position. Am I doing a good job of explaining it?
Yeah, I think so. But what I don't necessarily want like a lopsided relationship. I don't actually have a preference either way. All I want is whether it's backed by the state or not. I just want people to be able to voluntarily enter agreements that are consensual, and
Yeah,
whether you need a
I
state
do
for that or
too.
not, I don't really care. And whether it's lopsided or not, I think is up to those people engaging in the contract. And that's
Well, if you say that, then you're kind of agreeing with me then, because if the people engaging in the association determine the relations of the association, then necessarily it is a market socialist relationship, right? Because that's what the market socialist association is. It's a association that is propped up by the consent of all persons uh, perpetually, right? Um, and I want to make something very clear. In a stateless society, in a society that has no state, neither of us know what the norms of independent uh, law enforcers will be. Nobody knows what the contract rules that are enforced by these uh, independent arbiters will manifest as. No one knows what that will be. It could be ANCAP. It could be that contracts of wage labor are seen as binding, meaning that the workers can't say that this is something we want to change, right? That could be something that could occur. We could also have something to where contracts of bound, one is bound to an employer, could be something enforced, like feudalism or something like that. It could be something like slavery, could even be upheld by these independent uh, uh, units of law enforcement. Or alternatively to all of those, it could be something like market socialism, right? Um, but clearly, some of those are better than others, right? Clearly, some of those are immoral.
mm-hmm.
Like if we get rid of the state and replace it with some like Mad Max like association that says slavery's okay, right? And when the slave says, "Well, I don't want to be a slave anymore," the arbiter says, "Well, you agreed to it, so now you're a slave."
Mm-hmm.
That would be bad. That would be something that we would both agree is bad. Likewise, we would probably both agree with the feudalism thing. Well, if you want to leave your employer, you should be able to leave your employer, regardless of what so and so wrote on some piece of paper.
Mm-hmm.
You're a free human. And likewise, I just say that I think it will behoove human liberty to define property in a way that allows all those in an association to have some say in that association. And so, if they don't like the wage, if they don't like the employer, they don't like the capital provider, the manager, they remove the capital provider and manager. Now, that may seem unfair to them, but remember what I said to you the last time. The alternative is labor being forced to engage with capital on capital's term. All right, I'm just saying that capital now engages with labor on labor's term. It's the same amount of voluntary. It's just more voluntary for more people. In my view, that would be my position.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yeah, I just don't see that it's necessarily on one side's term, uh, because what I would say is fair is if you don't like the capital employer or capital owner, you can leave. Like that's what a voluntary
So, of
association
course,
is. Like so
it's
I
much
don't
better
if I
than
don't
it's
like
much better than feudalism. Yeah,
yeah,
it's a very good system.
if I don't like how you're treating me, I don't get to take you into like a hospital to like re-educate you and force you to treat me the right way. No, I just leave your presence and just go mind my own business. And that's how I think voluntary associations be. So like what I would advocate for in a labor dispute, or if you cheat someone out of money or something like that, is kind of the same way how we do that just on a day-to-day basis. If your friend if you loan your friend like $200 and they don't pay you back, well, like I think that there could be some kind of arbitrator to say, well, yes, you do owe him the money, but I don't think it's fair to go necessarily and use armed people to force him to pay the money. Just have that declaration like, okay,
Well, yeah, that's like
it's on
settling out of
record.
court.
You owe the money. You don't have to ever loan this guy money again. Just go your separate ways. The guy who stole the money is has ruined that business or friendship relationship, and we go on, and I think that's a much fairer system. Obviously, there's like if you murder someone, you're gonna have to be held to account by force. Um, so
Hmm.
there's a line there, but
But I do think in certain disputes there will need to be some type of arbiter, right? Most ANCAPs say this.
mm-hmm.
Most anarchists say this. Like I talked to a mutualist not that long ago, and the mutualist said, yeah, there'll need to be these basically arbiters. Like they're
Yeah,
just basically the same as ANCAP arbiters,
I think it's
but
better
they
done like with a credit system kind of thing.
a
Like we
credit system. I'm
like we
unfamiliar
have it
with that.
now. Well, just credit cards. Like if you don't pay your bills, no one comes to your house and knocks down your door and forces you to pay, but your credit goes lower.
Okay, but that doesn't speak to like legal like agreements. Like if I have a contractual agreement and you breach that contractual agreement, then you're kind of like stealing from me, right? Like if an employer doesn't pay me my wages, that's kind of a type of theft, is that not in capitalism?
Oh,
That's a
definitely.
violation of a contract. And so
Yeah,
then there'd be some
but
dispute. But mind you, this is not the type of dispute that I'm talking about when I say capital on labor's terms and
mhm.
labor on capital's terms. That's a totally different thing. But this is just like a standard capitalist dispute. This happens
Yeah,
in capitalism all the time, and capitalists say it is theft. And so
yeah.
the ANCAP arbiter would say,
Just like if
okay,
I don't pay my bill, I've still received the services, but I haven't paid for it. That is theft.
yeah, but some arbiter would say that now you're in debt, or you have to pay that back, or you have to engage in some type of repayment
Mhm.
of that to them.
Yeah, I
What
just
would
think
be
the
various types that the ANCAP arbiter would say that,
yeah,
right?
I think that modes of coercion should be peaceful and not
They've
violent.
agreed to this arbiter. They've both
Yeah.
have essentially hired this arbiter, right? That's how it works in these free market anarchist
Mhm.
systems. Like in mutualism, it's the same way, right? This is the thing that I was going to with uh, like how capitalism, uh, labor has to engage on capital's term, and in socialism, capital engages on labor's term. The reason why you don't really get what I'm saying with that is because you are only thinking about it in terms of capitalist property, right? What I'm saying, what if the independent arbiters recognize socialist property? They recognize common property, and they recognize personal property, but they don't recognize private property, right? They've drawn some distinction like that. And then the roles of the society, of people in that society, would necessarily and still voluntarily be a socialist one, a socialist anarchist one. And the only initiation of force is through these independent arbiters, just the same as in an
Mhm.
ANCAP society.
Well,
right?
yeah, I mean,
I don't see how that's any more restrictive than an ANCAP society.
I think that would be totally fine if you agreed to the arbiter. You agree, okay, whatever the arbiter's decision is here, we'll both abide by it. I think it would be kind of
Yeah,
like
that's
jury
the
selection. Like, okay, well, I know that this arbiter is always going to be socialist, so I'm not going to agree to arbitrate. Maybe we'll go for someone who's a little bit more balanced.
Yeah, well, now we get into problems with anarchism because I don't think that you could have a system where like half of the arbiters are capitalists and half of them are socialists. What happens when they have a dispute with each other? They go to a higher arbiter, right? And then eventually you get to a like a highest arbitration, like a high court or something. And then that high court is either socialist or it is capitalist. And then the society is either capitalist or it is socialist, right? And so we may have some problem with anarchism then, which both of you, me and you, we both agree that there are problems with anarchism like that. And
Well,
I think
assuming that you both have to agree to the arbiter, I don't think that that's necessarily a problem because I mean, if you have just half of them as capitalist, half of them as socialist, then and no one's seeking their services because they're going to be biased for whatever reason, then the market will have to adjust to something that is more favorable for both sides, or the whole industry collapses.
yeah, you're saying that one will ultimately supersede the other. That's what you're saying. In the market, one will compete the other.
Well,
Is that what you're saying?
not well. One in the sense of like perhaps the more a more balanced type or nuanced view that is not pure ANCAP
It's
or
like some
pure
kind of
communist.
synthesis.
Someone, I guess, but something that
I
both
mean, I'd
sides
say
might
that
think is
my
fair,
system
that they have a
is
fair
a kind
chance.
of synthesis already because it's not like I'm not like full ANCOM, which full ANCOM would be like everyone owns everything, which is I think that's silly.
Yeah,
Um, but like mine is already kind of a synthesis between that, which is something that could occur in the ANCAP society, like how I watched the debate between Stefan Molyneux, JF, and then those two like Swolitarian, whatever on modern
mm-hmm.
day debates. Um, Stefan made a great point. I don't know how the liberated society is going to be. You know,
Yeah,
he doesn't know. Maybe it'll be communist. He doesn't know. And he doesn't really care. It's going to be a free society either way. Right. That's what
yeah,
I'm kind of saying. But I'm also saying, I'm also cautioning, right? I'm saying, yeah, it'll be a free society. Um, but we can clearly see in these hypotheticals, like it could be this, this, and this, that that's not really a free society if it turns into that. Like if it turns into the slave, slavery, you know, that's not really a free society. If it turns into the anarcho feudalism, that's not really a free society. And if we're just saying we don't care what it ends up as, right, as long as it doesn't have a state and it has decentralized arbitration, then we're not really fully answering the question of what a free society is what I would say to Stefan. Um,
mm-hmm.
but I do think that I do think that was a good attitude to take in that debate specifically. Um, right.
Yeah.
Um,
I gotta finish that one because I had a few super chats that I
yeah,
didn't
I
see if
saw
they.
you were watching that too. Yeah.
Yeah. Um. Yeah, but going back to like what is exploitation and how much labor or whatever, how much value you have to put into it in order to, I guess, collect that surplus. Um, like, I'm just wondering where the line would be drawn, because like, I don't know. Let's just, for example, say like a restaurant, like, um, so the chefs are creating all of the food, but the owner is providing the plates and the ovens and the restaurant in which to present this food. The
Well,
owner might not
he's
necessarily be
maybe
doing any labor themselves, but they're organizing, they're making sure it's clean, they're making sure things are provided,
No,
at
it's a
the very least.
collaborative association.
Mm-hmm.
Everyone there is engaging in the laboring process. And so I would say the most free, the most liberated way to understand how much one is producing and versus another in that engagement is to step back and not allow the scales to be tipped, right? The most accurate way is to allow those engaged in the association to ascertain that themselves, right? I mean, if you play Monopoly, um, and obviously this is like maybe a silly example, but if you play Monopoly with someone, um, and the game is rigged in their favor, they've done studies of this. The people who the game is rigged in their favor for don't believe that the game is rigged in their favor. Like
Mm-hmm.
if you start them out with like so and so, if you give them extra points, and the only way to really ascertain semi-objectively if there's some unbalance, if there's some rigging in someone's favor, is to appeal to everyone, is to say, okay, everyone involved in this game, is there some rigging? Is this unfair? Is this unfair? And then you would get a more accurate answer. And I'm saying that in the capitalist association, in any free association, you wouldn't want to put the balance uh, in the hands of a certain person. You would want to put the balance in the hands of the association itself. And I think that that is an aspect of human freedom and is an aspect of deregulation, not regulation, right? Because you're sort of saying, let's allow everyone here to have a say. Let's take our hands off of this association. Let's allow the association to have its roles. This is common property, an aspect of personal property.
Yeah, I just don't know what. That's kind of like a zero sum game. Uh, Looking at it, because Monopoly is like that, and you can definitely rig Monopoly. But the people associating in a restaurant, I don't know what claim they necessarily have to all the facilities because they didn't purchase it in the first place, and they've been compensated for their cooperation the entire time. So
Well, yeah,
I don't see how.
they did not purchase it,
Yeah,
but they're to produce the service of the food, the general service of the restaurant, the upkeep of the restaurant, all of these things, their association is required, right?
yeah, but it's
And
but
I
their
think
labor.
to sit there and say, well, because one person provided the plates, therefore they decide what everyone provided. That's what I'm objecting to. That's how I like look at it and see it. Like this person provided the tables, therefore they say what everyone else provides. That's silly, and it to me, and I'm not being judgmental or anything, because it's putting force behind one person in the association. I'm saying let the association be free, let the
Yeah,
association work out more accurately without this sort of blindfolds around the person who's making the decision of how much people produce, and then you'll be more accurate. Like, right, my whole thing is obviously there's going to be some exploitation, there's going to be some mismanagement, there's going to be some miscalculation, but at least it's more accurate than having an unbalanced relationship. That's what I would say, right? That's
yeah.
my perspective.
I mean, that's a pretty good way of putting it. As far as the concern goes, I think that there's well, first of all, I think if the association wants to, if the associated workers want to go and hire like a plate provider, I think that that's totally fine. I have no preference whether the chefs and the waiters want to be the employer of the space provider and the equipment provider. But I think that there's a reason why typically the capital provider is the employer, because they're the one doing all
Well,
the
it's because of the
organizing.
state. It's because of the state, though.
Well,
It's
no, I
because
think
they
it's
own the means of production, and there's a finite number of means of production. There's more people, and the people have to associate on the means of production to produce, which is a human need. And the state backs up the original capital holder, and it doesn't back up the labor, which is associating
well,
with the means of production.
I think it's more about the initiative of the business owner, because they're the one, they have the vision for the business. They go out and organize the property that's needed. They go out and find employees. The employees don't typically get together and tell themselves, okay, we're going to be chefs. I'm going to hire some waiters, and then I'm going to find out some capital. That's like
Yeah,
the
well,
waiters
because
don't
they're
have that
not.
initiative. That because
Well,
the business owner is the
that's
one who
obviously true
organizes it all.
because the thing that brings them together is the necessity to produce for their own needs, right? I'm not
Hmm.
disagreeing with that. The thing that brings them together is the means of production. And so in capitalism, there's some guy who owns the means of production. In my system, there's even some guy who owns some means of production. And in capitalism, everyone has to associate on some given means of production, right? And this just occurs through some natural process of free association. But they're not associated until they're freely associated. So they don't know each other until they're forced by need to associate, essentially. And so to say that, oh, well, they didn't plan this beforehand, so they don't get to make the rule. I feel like that's just kind of like an arbitrary way of looking at it. Um, in the face of all the things that I said, they're still freely associating. And you're still saying that because this person held the property beforehand, they get to ascertain how much everyone contributes, which
Well,
is, in my view, unbalanced and not free because it's backed up by the state saying that they retain this ownership.
well, it isn't necessarily. I don't think really at all. Completely arbitrary decision by the owner. I think what I was saying is there's a reason why um, it tends to be like a smaller group or a single person who organizes these things instead of a large group coming together to organize and then hire capital. That's just how humans work.
Yeah,
But I
I'm
think
agreeing. I'm
I don't
agreeing
think
with that.
that the payment thing is so arbitrary. It's just supply and demand where and the workers can negotiate. They can say, okay, I'm not going to work for $2 an hour. Just I'm just going to go somewhere else. The the employer can only go as low as the prospective employees will basically allow. And everyone's trying to get as much as they can out of the situation. And that's where the
Yeah,
negotiation
but
comes in. But there tends
that's
to be
the
like a large scale negotiation throughout society. So there's like a standard, like, I'm not going to pay you $70 an hour to bus plates because no one does that. And we all know that. So,
Mhm. I'm agreeing that that is the way that it exists in capitalism, and it's also the way that it would exist in
yeah.
market socialism. People would associate to means of production, and then there would be an association, right? It's not before and then after, normally, typically. But the thing that I think that you're kind of incorrect about is that the negotiation is equivalent. It is not equivalent. And the reason why is because, number one, production is a human need, and there's a finite number, number one, and number two. There's a finite number of means of production, and thereby some people must associate on means of production. Now, if they have the ability to make some demands, but ultimately, because the state is on the side of the one who owns the property, their demands across all owners of means of production, across all capital owners, is is naturally unbalanced, right? This is something that's been known for a long time. And so, regardless of whether they say we're going to quit or not, uh, quit and do what, I would say. We'll quit and go somewhere else for someone who offers more. Well, by the nature of capitalist production, there always has to be a profit, or else the capital owner wouldn't engage in this relationship, right? That's
Mm-hmm.
inherent in the process itself. So necessarily there has to be this detachment, there has to be this imbalance. And the imbalance comes from necessarily the power of the state imbuing this power into the right of private property. Right? That's naturally a thing that occurs. And when I talk to a lot of capitalists, I want them to say that they earned it, right? I want them to tell me, well, the capitalists earned it because they owned it, right? I want them to say that to me, because then they don't have the problem, right? They don't have the problem of saying, well, I'm for maximizing liberty, and this somehow maximizes liberty, when they're really just saying they earned it, right? They earned the right to kind of have this unbalance. This unbalance is natural. This unbalance is okay. This unbalance is justified. It's meritocratic, even. Those sort of things. I want capitalists to tell me that, because then I know where they're at. Because I value autonomy. I don't value abstract things like, oh, they earned the right to have this unbalance, or they earned the right to control people. I don't value that. I value autonomy, as is the progression of history, as is the progression of morality, and all of this. We can see it through that, right? And so, if they tell me they just earned it, that's their right, then I know that we simply disagree. But if they're still saying stuff like, well, I want liberty, I want this autonomy and all this stuff, then I it's kind of confusing, because we're clearly not understanding each other then. But at least in the other situation, we understand each other, and we understand we disagree.
Yeah, I think there is some aspect of them earning it. I don't think necessarily having property means you earned it, but because you can get gifts. But I think that I feel like I'm kind of on both sides of this, because I do believe that you can earn exclusive ownership of private property. I also think that um, ownership of things like gifts or inheritance is also justified in the sense that it preserves liberty, because if you don't preserve that those kind of property rights, then everything falls apart, and then people's liberties are being violated.
Yeah, that's where I was when I was 17.
Mm-hmm.
The whole idea that you need private property, because it's to have personal property, you need this private property, right? And if you view it
Well,
like that, then of course, then it makes sense that, yeah, that would be how you maximize liberty. But the thing
yeah,
is, I think that that's just that's just a bourgeois ideology of attaching personal property to private property. I think that there very clearly is a difference between private property and personal property. And that difference is that personal property doesn't affect other people, it doesn't involve other persons. Like, for example, last time we talked, I explained how I view property as having to be different when it directly involves another person, because that's a personal relationship. That's involving another human being on your property, right, so to speak. And I think that human beings existing, that is a logically distinct thing. And human beings existing on some property is also a logically consistent thing that we can speak of. And the different types of relationships we can have with those people on your property, also another logically distinct thing that we can coherently speak of. And I think that I have no logical inconsistencies or problems in making such distinctions, right? Um,
yeah. I just think liberty requires some standard of respect for ownership.
I agree.
And
Definitely agree.
I, like we talked about how like a gun, if you use a gun to affect other people, then it becomes like you're justified in regulating that property. And so I don't see, and a gun would basically be personal property
Yeah, because I'm
versus
not
owning
taking
real
the guns
estate.
away. I'm not doing the thing where I'm like, oh, well, someone hurt someone with a gun. Let's get rid of all guns.
Yeah.
But I'm not saying that. I'm saying the gun for the person in distress is their liberty.
Hmm.
This is the statement I'm making. The gun for the person in need, in danger, is their liberty. But the gun for the one causing the danger is slavery, it is
Hmm.
theft, it is oppression, it is domination. And so I'm applying this to property notions,
Hmm.
and I'm saying the property is like a gun because property is upheld by force. It is. We can't deny that. And when one uses property for their own liberty, for their own strength, for their own autonomy, it is their autonomy. When they use it to fulfill their own means, Proudhon says this when he says property is liberty. And when someone uses property to hold others and to wield over others and to dominate others in an exploitative relationship, it is domination, it is theft, it is slavery. And this is um, emphasized when Proudhon says um, property is theft. And Proudhon also says that property is impossible because property, in a sense, always does this, which is something that I also say when I say that even personal property, to a certain extent, exploits people and dominates people because it is, in a sense, withholding something from another, decreasing their liberty. But I also say something that you would say, which is that this is justified because if we didn't have any type of personal property at all, we would have a net decrease in liberty, right? Overall,
Hmm.
right? But I don't think that's the case for other types of property, more explicit examples of dominating property and exploitative property. And then I would go on to say, maybe something you would disagree with, that is, you can make a logical distinction that isolates these types of property. For example, involvement of human persons within your property, stuff like that. The detachment of persons from the product of their labor when they are within your property. Certain logical constructs like that, which we can speak of independently, logically.
Hmm. I just don't make, I don't find any way to distinguish between like a personal and private property as far as rights to it,
Well, I just
because
explained how you do that.
well, I just think if you're using it to exploit or unjustly dominate, well, I guess domination is unjust. Uh, it doesn't matter if it's real estate or if it's a gun or if it's a, a little tack that you're poking people with. I don't. It's not the type of property. It's what you're doing with it. So,
Yeah,
but
that's what I would say.
I don't accept that rent or capital is exploitative. So I don't.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's
that's the
the
problem.
disagreement. But we're clearly not enemies here. We both want human autonomy. We both
Hmm.
want freedom for all people. I think that's what matters, right? And like, I'm not going to antagonize you. You're not like someone who's like, oh, well, we need like a huge state to like make everyone stay in line and break up all the unions and stuff like that.
Yeah, I think
So
the state
obviously
makes it worse.
we're not enemies, and maybe you'd even take a Stefan Molyneux stance of, well, I don't know what the world will be like after we get rid of coercion and after we get rid of the state. Um, and maybe you'd be totally fine if it turns out like a decentralized socialist model or a decentralized capitalist model. Maybe that's where you stand, and I that's respectable. I mean, I wouldn't say that you're on my side in particular because you're not anti-capitalist. I usually reserve the term comrade for them, you know. But I wouldn't say you're an
Well,
enemy, you know.
I got my old regalia here.
Uh,
It used to have Lenin on it, but that fell off. This was like an old Russian flask.
that
Um,
that old larpy, that's very larp, very cringe.
yeah. No, I used to have. I had like the Russian hat too with the little Soviet symbol. That fell off too. Maybe Soviet construction. Maybe a comment on that. Uh,
Mhm.
yeah. Well, I keep it around as a reminder of the past.
Yeah, I still I take a lot of my old attitudes from being an ANCAP. I still hold a lot of them. I don't know, maybe you could tell. I'm not like other leftists, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
I have a lot of talking points that resemble ANCAP talking points because I used to be an ANCAP. That was who I was. I was a very hardcore ANCAP, very extremely consistent, too consistent. I was too consistent. I was an anti-natalist.
Yeah,
Yeah, because you don't consent to being born.
it's true. I think that's a good argument for why your parents do have responsibility to feed you, because capitalists are always like,
Mhm.
I have no responsibility to feed you, that's your job. But
Mhm.
if you're creating a person without consent, well, you've created kind of a consent vacuum, so now you are responsible for providing for that being that never agreed to exist in the first place, up to a
Yeah,
certain point.
but the here's the craziest argument about that. I don't know if we're really off topic now. We
Yeah.
have been for like an hour, but uh, it is murder, right? It is deontologically murder if we're using deontological ethics. If one engages in an action which they know will result in the death of another, right? We can hold that as a moral axiom. Um, when one gives birth, they are engaging in an action, giving birth, which they know will later result in the death of someone, their child, because everyone dies inherently.
Hmm.
So every time you give birth, it's murder.
That is a mind fuck right there.
Yeah. I was the worst in high school. I think I told you that last time.
Yeah. Yeah, that's one of those things that'll keep people up at night.
Mhm. You get around it by abandoning deontological ethics.
Yeah. That's yeah, I have I think that the principled ethics are, well, it's necessary for ethics, but the principles and the ethics themselves are pointless without the consequences.
Yeah,
So I think that's the problem of deontology.
I definitely agree. I'm not like a full utilitarian either. I'm kind of more of like a weird form of egoist, but like an egoist who like believes in altruism. Like it's very weird. I made a
Mm.
whole video on my moral theory. It's kind of like it's like unifying egoism, consequentialism, and like Hegelian dialectics all into one. But I think I did a pretty good job. I hope I did. Um,
Yeah,
yeah,
I think I would probably agree with a lot of that.
yeah,
That's kind of my approach.
yeah. Because you used to be a leftist. Did you were you into Hegel back then?
Not really. Like I only started really looking into that after the my turn.
Mm,
I still retain most of my prior values. It's just now I feel like they're better obtained through like private property rights and capitalism. And I still have this value of like communityism but not communism, where I want local economies to be more, well, less corporate and more
More
local and,
decentralized.
yeah,
Yeah.
decentralized, and cooperate with each other and care for each other more because they're local. They're the people you know. You're going to care about how you affect the people you do business with if they're your neighbors. I think that those are still my values, and I still care about liberty. Obviously, I just now see socialism as more of a big government thing than a small government
Mm.
liberty based thing.
That's unfortunate. The original libertarians were all socialists. I'm sure you have heard of that.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and yeah, I'm at the point where I no longer label myself as a socialist, basically, um, because that's how it's seen, and that's totally not what I advocate for at all. Um, right. I was going to say something else too. Um, oh yeah, the whole meme about leftist infighting. I'm sure you've heard. Um,
Yeah.
Leftists always disagree on like everything.
Mm-hmm.
And so, as much as the most centralized, the most unitarian, the most top down controlled government is a leftist government, also the most decentralized, the most atomized and um, dispersed authority uh, is also probably supported by leftists.
Mm-hmm.
You'll have some on that camp and some on the other camp. That's how broad leftism is. Like the whole thing that you just talked about, decentralized production, local production, subsistence production, sort of things like that. Um, Leftists love that. Like they talk about it all the time. Like
Yeah.
I read Alec Nove, and he's like, well, I find myself partial to the people who think that production should only be on the local level. Like you should only have like little farms that produce things.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, I still think consumerism is a huge problem, and
mhm.
I don't think it's a capitalist problem, although capitalism definitely seeks to promote consumerism because it leads to more profits. But I think it's a people problem. They want to consume more, and so the market gives them that. I don't buy a new phone every year. I like to keep my technology running until its last breath so I consume less. A lot of people don't care. And, like, yeah, I think it's more of a cultural problem. Because
Mhm.
if people were like that, yeah, maybe an individual phone would be more expensive. But then there would be a larger industry around maybe phone repair and keeping your phone and maybe modifying your phone as more technology improves instead of just getting a whole new phone and just throwing out the old one. Um, I, I think that's a big problem of our society. So I still have those values. I just think that those things are better done through free market things. Like people decide that they want to not throw away so much, and so the market will adjust instead of trying and regulate it from the top down, which anytime pretty much anything like that has been attempted, it just bloats the system, nothing changes, and it gets more corrupt. And that was kind of my heel turn.
Yeah, I agree. I definitely agree that statism is not the solution,
Mm-hmm.
right? Um, it is a maybe a necessary consequence of any system of government, but it's not the solution. Like that's not the end game of a society, um, right? I'm not pro centralized authority at all. Um, yeah, definitely agree with you on that.
Yeah, and I think your model of socialism definitely minimizes that as compared to others. Um, with
There are people who go further than me. Like, talk to mutualists, okay?
yeah, yeah,
You'll probably like mutualists. Um, I still believe in democracy.
the God that failed.
Yes, that was the other thing.
Yep. Uh, yeah. Well, we can. We've been going about an hour and a half. We can
Yeah,
keep going a little bit, or we can continue
yeah.
this another day.
I just want to see if we can't conclude something about the hypocrisy
Yeah,
topic.
yeah,
Um, I feel like we're kind of in agreement now. Like, maybe Hasan and Philosophy Tube, maybe they are hypocrites. I think they are hypocrites a little bit. But in terms of other, like, you want to say all socialists are hypocrites, and I push back on that, obviously. And I think we can find common grounds with the statement that a lot of amount of socialists are hypocrites, and some of them are not hypocrites. Right? I think we can agree with that, right? Maybe.
yeah. I mean, I don't think all socialists are necessarily hypocrites, but I think if you're taking value and alienating that from the original producer, and that's exploitation, I think that that's almost impossible to avoid hypocrisy, because like you agreed with the fact that if Vaush is perpetually profiting from his editors and from maybe the people producing art, I don't know if he produces his own art, but it's just the hypothetical, um, then he's necessarily getting like infinitely expanding value from just this one-time transaction through his ownership of the product of the editor or the artist. And
Hmm.
and you did, I think, agree that that is exploitation.
I do think that it is because of the way that it makes money on YouTube.
Mm-hmm.
Right. It's very specifically it's generating money through contributing to a clout persona, right?
Mm-hmm.
A type of image, right, that is then creates AdSense revenue, and that AdSense revenue is then it's exploited from everyone because YouTube's a corporation, and then they pay him, and then he exploits it further, and it's all a product of how capitalism recreates all the hierarchies and stuff. It's a self-reifying system, and all of that. But I do think it is exploitation. I think it is a form of exploitation. um, I agree, but then again, I don't think that he considers it exploitation. That would be the important thing. I don't think he considers it a type of exploitation, and so then to call him a hypocrite kind of loses the meaning of hypocrisy, because if he's not claiming that what he's doing is exploitation and wrong, then you can't really say that he's acting against his principles, right? What you can say is that his principles are arbitrary and silly, which I do, but you can't say he's a hypocrite, right? With
Well, I
Hasan,
think.
though, Hasan, I think you can say he's a little bit of a hypocrite. And with Philosophy Tube, I also think you can say that she's a little bit of a hypocrite also.
Mm-hmm. Well, I don't think you necessarily need to be aware that you're a hypocrite to be a hypocrite,
Well, it's
right?
not just that, it's that he is actively making a distinction. He's actually addressed this. He's actively made a distinction that is a logically consistent distinction, um, that says that he doesn't have to not exploit people. Like, it's exploitation is okay if it's in this certain boundary, right? And he said
Mm-hmm.
that, and so therefore you can't really say that he's a hypocrite. You can say he's silly,
Well, I
which I
think it's kind
agree.
of ad hoc just to avoid being
Yeah,
a hypocrite?
that's what I'm saying. I'm
Okay.
saying it is ad hoc to avoid being a hypocrite. That's what I'm saying.
Mm,
That's my position.
yeah.
Um,
So I think that it's
but
dishonest
like
in that sense.
you wouldn't say that I'm a hypocrite though, because I don't exploit people. Like I don't, I don't do that. I've started cooperative YouTube channels. I don't exploit people for their labor. I don't do that. So I think, and people like non-compete, people like Bad Mouse Production, it goes out and actually organizes tenants unions, and non-compete who invests in and provides labor to various online cooperatives and stuff like that. These are people who don't engage in exploitation. They don't
Yeah.
do that, and I
Yeah, I
don't
would agree
think they're
there.
hypocrites.
How does the cooperative YouTube channel work, by the way?
Everyone who is a verified member uh, of the cooperative YouTube channel has a say in the running of the cooperative YouTube channel, and they get to produce to the cooperative YouTube channel. And if someone says, "Oh well, I'm not going to produce for this amount of time," then everyone would agree to say maybe lower the amount that they receive in money from the venture and all that sort of thing. But it's just a cooperative, but with a YouTube channel,
Mm-hmm.
right? It's very simple.
Yeah.
It's not a hard thing to do.
Yeah, and I totally support that. Like if everyone's entering this voluntarily, like that's within my values. I actually think so when I was saying like I retain some of my previous some communist socialist values, I want people to use their property rights and their freedom to produce socialism and communism if that's what they want. And I don't want to stop them from doing any of that. I just want them to have the
Yeah.
right to decide for themselves what happens to whatever they own,
And
and be able
again,
to share it.
I don't want to, create an antagonism in the conversation, given that we talked for a long while already. But again, I would say in my system, if a bunch of people want to pay the capital owner a bunch of money for the value that they produce in the cooperative, then they can do that. If they want that to be a perpetual thing, then they just continuously agree to have that be a perpetual thing. It's all based on consent in the model. Um,
Yeah.
and the funny thing that I get when I tell that to some libertarians is, oh, well, I don't want them to consent though, which just makes me laugh. I find that funny when they say that to me.
Yeah, that's really
They're like,
odd.
the problem
The
is they consent to it. The problem is you have to consent.
yeah,
I get what they mean, but it's funny when they say it because it's like, come on, you got to hear what you're saying.
yeah. Yeah, cuz my problem is not that. My problem is like the perverse incentive of enforcing whatever the workers if they just feel like overthrowing you one day, then they just can. So
Well, what if the
and
boss
since
wants to just kick out all of his workers?
well, why
Then
not?
you say he earns it, Yeah, why not?
Yeah.
Exactly, he earned it. It was his property, right? That's an appeal to this notion of right that is not in line with liberty. It is instead some carryover from some other moral system. They earned it. Well, that's no different from, and forgive me for saying this, but it's functionally no different from someone saying, "Yeah, I support freedom. I support democracy, but the king earned the kingdom." Like it's the same type of moral statement, right? Don't tell me you believe in autonomy and then tell me that you believe in a right to control people uh, just because you earned this or that. You know, tell me you can say that, but you have to demonstrate that that's like a necessity, right? Like if we don't have this, then we don't have freedom at all, right?
Mm-hmm.
you can't really make that case. It doesn't sound like you're attempting to make that case right
Well,
now.
I would say that because
Yeah, you would say that, but
it's a necessity to be able to control your personal property,
yes,
and so
it's
I
a
think it's a
necessity to be
necessity.
allowed to own a gun. Yes,
Yeah, I think it's a necessity to for people to respect each other's ownership, and that would include ownership
yes,
of capital. So
yes.
if you decide to disassociate from your workers, it's not controlling them; it's just controlling what you own.
Well, that was when you agreed to associate, it became common property.
Um,
You agreed to that
I
relationship. You agreed to it. You consented to it.
I think you yeah in the case that you do
In
consent,
in the
but
in the
in
system
yeah
that I'm proposing, you made that informed consent, just like labor makes the informed consent in capitalism to engage in capital's terms, the capital owner of that they associate with. The capital owner, right, in my system, they can choose to associate with any workers that they want. They can say, "Oh, well, I'm not gonna choose to associate with these groups of workers. I am going to choose to associate with these groups of workers." But once they associate, they're associating on the terms of the workers that they have agreed to associate with, right? It's a
yeah.
reversal of the system. It's the same consent, same level of consent.
Well, where I would disagree there is just that
You have to
by
say they
default,
earned
if
it.
the state if the state
Yeah,
is
you have to say that. That's
yeah like if the state is
yeah.
siding with someone's claim on a property that I don't think that they actually own,
Yeah, see,
that's the
it's all
problem.
about
But I think in capitalism, you actually do own the capital. I
yeah,
think that
you see
aligns more with reality.
the difference is you just agree with the capitalist ethic. You just agree
Well, yeah.
with yeah, and I'm saying why? Like why would you agree with it? Like
Well,
I mean, if you just want to say, if you just want to say they earned it, right? If you just want to say they own it, therefore they earned it, therefore they have that right,
mm-hmm.
then we're dealing with some deontological framework that you've created. Fine. That's some other moral system that you have. But if you're telling me that you value this abstract notion, as you had before, of liberty, of autonomy, well, then the question doesn't end there. The question is deeper. It's deeper than that. It's is this a restriction of liberty of the majority? Is that necessary? Is that required for something? Right?
Yeah,
And your position, you would say yes, right? You're also saying that. So you're saying a lot of different things. Number one, first you're saying, well, they earned it. It's their right. That's morality. That's the right. But you're also saying that they necessitated for liberty as well. Um, and you're saying these two things at the same time. Which one is it? Is it just theirs, or is it necessitated by some other principle of liberty?
yeah. I just think ownership has to work like that, or else you will have less liberty.
Why? Why do you believe that?
Um, so it's like why? What claim do the workers have over?
See, now you're appealing to the other one. You can't do that. That's not liberty. That's an appeal to right.
What do you mean?
That's an appeal to abstract right that they earned it. That's not an appeal to liberty. The other
Oh,
thing.
like why? Why? So yeah,
Yeah,
why the consequences would be worse for liberty if we violate this
yeah,
right?
yeah. I am very interested in knowing
Um,
how it reduces liberty.
because then you basically just have arbitrary
No,
ownership.
that's not true. How is it arbitrary? How is the uh, over 150-year long tradition of market socialism, mutualism, market socialism, Ricardian socialism? Is that is it like arbitrary? Is that like pixie dust? No, it's clearly not. It's a other option that's present to you that you would have to analyze and say, okay, uh, somehow this ability to dominate and control the majority of the population is actually good for liberty. It's actually everyone's happy with because of it. And if we removed it, everyone would be sad. You would have to you would have to tell that to yourself. You would have to believe that, right?
So
You'd have to analyze the system, and you'd have to say that you actually genuinely don't think that reducing this power hierarchy would be good for liberty, right?
Uh, yeah, I think that the hierarchy of owner and not owner is totally justified. Um,
Okay,
because, well, it
it,
doesn't matter what property you're talking about. It could be a rock that you found on the beach. Uh, if you if you don't have
I agree.
if
I'm
you don't
not
have
disagreeing.
the at least to some extent a guarantee of either society's respect or less ideally the backing of the state or some kind of force, either self-imposed or maybe you hire a bodyguard or something. Um, if you don't have the guarantee that you have sole control over that thing that you own, then you can't predict what is going to happen. You have no,
I'm not advocating
then
for
liberty will
not
just.
having sole control over things.
Mhm.
That's personal property. That's something I wholeheartedly believe in. Ignore my dog. That's something I wholeheartedly believe in for the reason that you're saying. But you seem to think that there is no logical distinction between personal property and this private property notion of using it in this particular way that I've described before. And I'm telling you that is clearly not true. And the 100, 200-year long tradition of market socialism would attest to the fact that that is not true, that that is the only coherent way of understanding property. There's clearly this other way of understanding property, the understanding that there is common property and personal property as opposed to public property and private property, and that this notion is logically coherent, right? We can, as I've said to you before, we can understand this relationship. We can understand that persons associate on property, and we can understand that that is distinct from owning something without persons associating on it. We can understand that's distinct. We can also understand that people associate in different structures, and those structures have different distinct logical outcomes. Uh, uh, we can understand that logically, and so we can combine the two, association on property and a distinct relationship and the products of that relationship, and then we can logically understand a distinct, a fundamentally distinct category of property, and we can call that property private property, and we can say that that type of property is unjustified property, and we can be entirely coherent, and we can be entirely consistent, and and we can still hold to the good fruits of personal property, right?
Yeah, as far as describing it goes, I think that you can have a distinction, but as far as justification and rights go, I don't think that there is really a distinction because if I can decide to share my car, I on whatever terms I want because I'm the owner. It's always on the owner's terms. Then I can decide how I want to share anything in any way, whether you use it for free or you pay me to use it or I pay you to use it. That's all fair game because as the owner, I get to decide how other people interact with my property, whether I
Yeah,
don't allow them
that's
to touch it
that's
at
personal
all
property.
or not.
That's personal property. You can
But I don't.
turn personal property into private property by what you use it for, just like you can turn a gun into everyone's business based off of who you shoot it at.
Yeah, But
Right? That's what I'm saying. It's a logically coherent distinction. If you take your personal property and you move people on it, okay, that's fine. You've just invited people to use your personal property. But if you take that personal property, you invite people to use it, and then you use the fact that they're associating on your private property, your personal property, and your control over that personal property to get things out of them, then you make it their business. And I'm saying my position is merely that it behooves autonomy, it behooves liberty for us to say that it is then everyone's common property when you agree to engage in that specific function, the specific function of production and association, which is a human need, and the specific function of a value profit from exchange of use without exchange of ownership. Right? These two things. And we can speak of them as distinct things, and we can understand them as distinct things very consistently, no contradictions. We can still have the ability for a person to own the clothes on their back, the things in their home, and the fruit of their labor. But we don't have domination in this manner. That is my contention.
mhm. I just don't think it's domination because the people associating with the property are also getting something out of this association. So that
Yes,
is the
they're
point
getting
of the
something,
association.
just like you get something out of paying taxes. But did you consent to pay taxes?
No, but people do consent to
Ah,
associate
ah.
to
But
businesses or
do you need the fruits of the taxes? Do you need enforcement of your rights?
well, you definitely need enforcement of rights.
Ah, so you need it. So you choose to pay your taxes. Because if you didn't pay your tax, you could choose not to pay your taxes. Your rights just wouldn't exist, and the government would come in and take you and fine you
Well,
and
yeah,
take
in
money.
the sense that I need to protect myself from the government, I need to do what they say. Yeah.
So it's an unbalanced relationship. And it's an unbalanced relationship to say that one group of persons has a definitive right to production.
But
Production is a human need.
I can't do anything to you if you don't associate with my business model.
If you
Like
don't associate with the business model, then you don't produce. And if you don't produce, then no one makes anything that they need to live, and the society doesn't function.
but you don't
So the
need
society
to
necessarily needs this association of production. It's a necessity. It's
but
not like
any
it's like
particular
taxes.
one any
It's like taxes.
well no
It is. It
because
is like taxes. It is. It is a form of taxation.
any particular business model is not necessary for production. So like does society need a bakery that produces vagina shaped cupcakes with gloss on it to make it look like it's a dripping vagina?
No, but the
No.
people who work there need the money so that they can buy the other things that they need. Right? That's the nature of an economy. Right? Production needs to occur. Like, right?
They
I'm a graphic designer. Right? The society doesn't need my graphic designing skills. Right? It
mhm.
needs food and water and shelter. But to get food, water, and shelter, someone is willing to give me that if I provide them with some graphic design element, right? That's how an economy works. So all production in a market economy is how one generates wealth, which is then used to sustain themselves based on the things that they need, right? I'm not saying that, oh, all the problems in society will be solved if we just give everyone bread. That's silly. But I'm saying something deeper. I'm saying in the market, I'm gonna say it's an aspect of freedom. Okay, it's some aspect of personal property. Um, how what is a necessity in this market? What associations are necessitated in this market if we're going to have the rules of personal property? Well, association and production. Production is needed. You need to make things in the market. And if you don't make things, then you can't get the things that you need, right? So you can't choose to not make things. You can, but you'll just die, right? Right? No matter how you cut it, no matter how you split it, you could have like a welfare state, but someone still needs to produce
Hmm.
somewhere, someone somewhere.
Yeah, but the way I see it is almost none of the production actually needs to occur, and the necessary production of food and shelter doesn't have to be done cooperatively. It could be just done hunter gatherer style. So almost all the economy is done purely out of convenience. And yeah, like
That's a
it's
highly contentious statement. It's very contentious.
yeah,
Like I don't think many people would agree with that statement.
well, it's
Like
the fact that we just have heat and running water
like
is a
I mean if you're
convenience
I mean
over our natural state.
I hate to be the guy who says this, but like if you think it's all just a convenience, then go like live in a log cabin. Like you know, this isn't something that everyone can do. Like look at me. I'm like a 5'4" little thing, entity. If I went out there, I would just like shrivel up and die. Like I need society. Most people need society. We've domesticated ourselves. We become slaves of technology, you know.
Yeah, I think we touched on that a little bit last time. It's like, well, at this point we're addicted to the production model, but are we entitled to that addiction? Kind of thing. I I do hold that uh, most of the production is not necessary. So
All the production is
anything,
necessary because that's the nature of a market economy. That's how it works. And because of the necessity of personal property, which you and I agree upon, look at that, we agree, amazing. Some unique group of people are going to be producing the necessities, whatever those could be, right? We agree with that. Um, uh, and the only way to get those necessities from them would then be to provide to them something that they value as well through a trade, a fair trade, right? And so, therefore, we can understand that production is a necessity in this justified market society. Like, that's just the way that it works. If you're not producing something, if you're not doing something, that the person who makes the food likes, then you're not getting the food, right? And so everyone has to do something. Everyone's got to engage in the society. Everyone's got to get that money, that dough. Everyone's got to hustle.
if you want to have a convenient life, you could spend all of your time uh, growing food and hunting it yourself, or you can make it more convenient for yourself and have some downtime and some amenities and commodities. And I think it sounds like I'm downplaying what a convenience is, but or maybe overplaying it. But I think that that's true. Is the natural state of life and definitely human life is going to be harsh and difficult, and anything you do, even as much as sharpening a stick on a rock, is done for convenience. It's done
Well,
to reduce the amount of effort that you have to put in.
well, you wouldn't say. Are you telling me that you wouldn't say that a spear is needed to live in like the ancient savannah? Like, are you saying like you could survive just like without a spear, like without some instrument to kill an animal and eat them?
Well,
That's
that's
this is how contentious what you're saying is. Like, I don't think anyone's gonna accept that premise, right? I
well,
don't.
yeah. I mean, humankind is not really able to survive on its own without tools. because we've evolved.
Well, you just said it's for pure convenience that you have tools that you need to eat and live. Like I really don't think that that is true at all. I don't think you believe that either.
Um,
I
I mean, you could survive on fruits and mushrooms and stuff.
could you?
Depending on where you live, I guess.
What about the all the vitamins that you need to get from meat?
Um, I think you can get that from mushrooms, but I don't know. But yeah, it is. No, it's an interesting question. How our
Well, you're
evolution.
gonna need. Are you gonna say that the picking of the mushrooms is a convenience too? Like, where does this line begin and where does it end?
Well,
Right? Is wanting to live a convenience? Is living a convenience? Like you just choose to live or choose to die? Like
if
it's
you carve spears and give the mushroom picking guy some spears in exchange for his mushrooms, that would be convenience. But it is. I no, you're right. There is a good conversation to be had about the state of human evolution and our dependence upon the tools and the production of those tools. Like, you could imagine if we become brains that have robot bodies, then survival depends on this whole industry of producing robot bodies and maintaining them.
yeah.
What entitlement do people have in the production of those tools? So, yeah, that's a difficult question. I think that the best way to navigate that is to have property rights. Um,
I agree. This entire conversation have upheld property rights.
mm-hmm.
So I think I've given you a lot to think about, which is good. My ears are ringing now because every time I take a shower, my ears ring because water gets in them. It's horrible. Um, but if there's anything else you want to say, that would be fine. But I think we're nearing the end, right? So
Yeah, we'll end it there and have another go soon.
oh, you just ended it right there. Not
No,
even a final statement.
well, yeah, I feel like I've beaten the horse to death at this point.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
I'll end it here as well. And ended.
Alrighty. Dog bless.